The door to the pumping room burst open. I jerked back, milk spilling across my lap, my heart hammering as Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face flushed and wild with panic. He had been running through the hospital corridors up 3 floors, searching for me like his life depended on it. Eleanor, he gasped, his chest heaving. Thank God. I've been looking everywhere. It's Aunt Evelyn. She's at Mass General. Stroke, critical condition. Everyone's there. Dad, Catherine, everyone. You need to come, now. I sat there in that sterile pumping room, milk dripping onto the floor, the mechanical hum of the breast pump still going in the background, and something inside me snapped. Not the clean break of glass. The ugly, splintering crack of bone. I started laughing. A bitter, unhinged sound that echoed off the pale yellow walls and made Marcus take a step back, his panic shifting to confusion, then alarm. They need me now, I said, my voice raw and strange even to my own ears. Now they remember I exist. Now when it's convenient. When it fits their narrative. When they need another warm body to fill a hospital waiting room and play the role of concerned family member. Marcus stared at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. 5 weeks of hell will do that to a person. 5 weeks ago, when my son entered this world, 3 months too early, his body so small he could fit in the palm of my hand when he weighed barely more than a bag of sugar, and every breath was a battle he might lose, I had begged them. Literally begged. I had reached out to every single one of them, my voice breaking as I described how tiny he was, how the wires and tubes covered more of him than his own skin. How the monitors beeped their warnings through the night while I sat alone in the darkness and prayed. Please, I had whispered into the void. Please just acknowledge that we're here, that we're fighting, that we matter. My father, Edward, had responded with a smiley face. A yellow circle with a curved line. That's what my son's life was worth to him. My stepmother, Catherine, hadn't even bothered with that much. Just silence. Deafening, deliberate silence. But Aunt Estelle... Oh, Aunt Estelle had responded. The woman who ruled our family with an iron fist wrapped in pearls and false philanthropy. The woman who controlled every narrative and every family decision like she was running a hostile corporate takeover. She had sent me something special. While I sat 3 floors above my dying son, pumping breast milk at 2 in the morning with tears streaming down my face while I listened to the alarms and wondered if this would be the night I lost him. Aunt Estelle sent me a photo of herself, draped in a designer gown that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage, standing on a stage under glittering lights, accepting applause at the Children's Hospital Fund Gala. Her caption gushed about family values and giving back and sharing love. The Children's Hospital, the same hospital where my son was dying. She was literally floors above him, basking in praise for her generosity, using his crisis as a backdrop for her performance. And she couldn't even walk down 3 floors to see him, to see me, to acknowledge that her own flesh and blood was fighting for his life. That was when something inside me didn't just break. It incinerated, turned to ash. I finally understood with brutal clarity that my family had never seen us as people. We were props, inconvenient, messy props that didn't fit their carefully curated image of Crimson family perfection. My son's suffering wasn't a tragedy to them. It was an embarrassment, something to be hidden, managed, and eventually repackaged into a photo opportunity. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I promise this story is just beginning. Drop a comment below about your own experiences with toxic family dynamics. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. 8 weeks earlier, I had been someone I barely recognized now. A woman still clinging to the fantasy that if I just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, bled enough, my family might finally see me as worthy of their love. I was Eleanor Vance, 34 years old, and I spent my days writing stories that made the Crimson family uncomfortable. Stories about real people struggling with addiction, living in shelters, fighting to survive on streets the Crimsons only drove past in their expensive cars on their way to charity galas, where they wrote checks and felt virtuous. My work was hands-on, messy, raw. I interviewed people who smelled like desperation and looked them in the eyes while they told me about their children, their losses, their stubborn refusal to give up. the kind of work that made Aunt Estelle physically recoil when I mentioned it at family dinners. "You write about those people," she had said once, her lip curling slightly as if she had tasted something rotten. "Can't you find something more appropriate? Something that reflects better on the family?" My husband, Julian, was everything my family should have been, but wasn't. An architect who built structures that could withstand earthquakes, hurricanes, the kind of force that would level everything else around them. That's what he was for me, unshakable. When my family made me feel small, Julian reminded me I was whole. When they made me question my worth, he showed me my value. He was the only person who looked at me and saw Eleanor, not the disappointment, not the sensitive one, not the black sheep who insisted on touching the dirt the Crimsons preferred to pretend didn't exist. For 4 years we had been trying to have a baby. 4 years that felt like 40 each month, a fresh wound, each negative test, a small death. But we kept trying because that's what you do when you want something desperately enough. You endure. You hope. You let your heart break over and over because the alternative is giving up, and neither of us knew how to do that. Then I got pregnant, and I lost it. 8 weeks in, I was alone in our apartment when the cramping started. It felt like my body was tearing itself apart from the inside. I remember stumbling to the bathroom, the world tilting, and then there was blood. So much blood. More blood than I thought a person could lose and still be conscious. Julian found me on the tile floor, my hands pressed against my abdomen like I could physically hold everything together through willpower alone. The ambulance, the hospital, the D&C procedure that scraped away what remained of my hope, along with the tissue that had been our child. My family sent flowers, expensive ones, the kind you send to business associates. 10 months later, I got pregnant again. This time I made it to 10 weeks. I was cautiously optimistic during the ultrasound, holding Julian's hand, watching the screen, waiting to see the heartbeat that would tell us everything was okay. The technician went quiet. Too quiet. She mumbled something about getting the doctor and left us in that dark room with the gel drying on my stomach and Julian's grip getting tighter and tighter on my hand. When the doctor came in, her face was carefully arranged into professional sympathy. "I'm so sorry. There's no heartbeat." Those words carved themselves into my bones. I had been walking around for days, maybe weeks, carrying death inside me and not knowing it. My body hadn't gotten the message. It was still pretending, still hoping, still producing all the hormones that made me believe I was pregnant when I was really just a tomb. After that one, my father, Edward, actually said, "Well, at least it happened early. Better now than later." As if the timing of my grief somehow made it more manageable. As if losing a wanted child was just a matter of spreadsheet logistics. The third pregnancy was the one that nearly destroyed me. I made it to 13 weeks. Past the supposed danger zone, past the point where miscarriage becomes statistically unlikely. I had started showing just a small curve that I would touch throughout the day to remind myself this was real. We had told the family. I had bought maternity clothes. We had started discussing names. And then, one morning, I woke up and something felt wrong. Not pain. Worse. A terrible quiet where there should have been sensation. I knew before the ultrasound confirmed it. I knew before the doctor's careful words. My body had failed me again, and this time the failure felt personal, intentional, like I was fundamentally broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. That was when Aunt Estelle sat me down in her pristine parlor surrounded by her antique furniture and her carefully arranged fresh flowers and told me with the compassionate tone of a corporate executive, delivering a layoff notice that perhaps motherhood simply wasn't in my cards. "Some women aren't meant to be mothers, Eleanor. Perhaps it's time to accept that and focus on supporting Julian's career. You could do so much for the family in other ways." The subtext was clear. Stop embarrassing us with your failures. Stop trying. Stop wanting. Be useful in ways that don't involve producing the grandchildren they claimed to want, but clearly only wanted under perfect controlled conditions. I should have seen it then. The way my grief was treated like a character flaw, the way my losses were framed as personal inadequacy, the way they measured my worth only by how well I performed the role they had assigned me. When I got pregnant with Liam and made it past 8 weeks past 10 weeks past the cursed 13-week mark, I felt something dangerous bloom in my chest. Hope. Reckless, foolish, absolutely stubborn hope. I thought maybe this baby would be different. Maybe this baby would be my redemption in their eyes. Maybe once I finally gave them the grandchild they wanted, they would finally love me the way I had always needed them to love me. Maybe Liam would be the bridge between who I was and who they wanted me to be. I was so wrong, it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. I was catastrophically wrong. At 27 weeks on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, I was sitting at my desk working on a grant proposal when I felt it. Not the gentle trickle of amniotic fluid you might expect, but a sudden gush of warmth spreading down my legs, soaking through my clothes, pooling on the chair. For a moment, I couldn't process what was happening. My brain refused to accept it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not when we were finally winning. I stood up and more fluid poured out, and that's when the panic hit a wall of terror so complete I couldn't breathe. Julian found me standing in the middle of our home office, shaking my pants, soaked through tears streaming down my face, and I watched all the color drain from his face. He went from confused to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. He grabbed the hospital bag we had packed weeks ago in a fit of optimistic preparation, threw my coat over my shoulders, and somehow got me to the car. I don't remember the drive. I remember sirens. I remember praying, bargaining with God, with the universe, with anyone who might be listening. Please not again. Please not this baby. Please let him live. At the hospital, they descended on me like a SWAT team. Nurses, doctors, residents, all moving with urgent precision. They hooked me up to monitors, started IVs, pumped me full of medications with impossible names. Magnesium sulfate to protect the baby's brain. Betamethasone to mature his lungs. Tocolytics to try to stop the contractions that were already starting my body preparing to expel this baby who wasn't ready, who couldn't survive outside my body yet. But Liam had other plans. Maybe he knew somehow that staying inside me wasn't safe anymore. Maybe he was a fighter even then. 3 hours later, he arrived. 3 hours of labor that felt like 3 lifetimes, and then suddenly he was here, and he was silent. That silence was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. Newborns are supposed to cry. They're supposed to scream their arrival into the world. Liam didn't make a sound. He was so small, Julian could hold him in one palm, this tiny gray creature that didn't look like a baby at all. He looked like something not quite finished pulled from the oven too soon, his skin translucent enough that I could see the network of veins beneath his eyes still fused shut. 2 pounds and 1 ounce, the weight of a bag of flour. When he finally made a sound, it wasn't a cry. It was a mewl, soft and kitten-like, and then they were rushing him away to the NICU team waiting in the corner, and I was screaming his name even though he couldn't hear me, even though he was already gone. The NICU became my entire world, my prison, my purgatory. It was a place of artificial twilight dim lights that never fully brightened even during the day, designed to protect sensitive preemie eyes. A place of beeping monitors that created a constant soundtrack of anxiety. Each alarm a jolt of adrenaline, each tone indicating a different crisis. A place of hushed voices and careful movements, and a fear so profound it became part of my cellular structure. Lived in my bones, sat in my chest like a stone that grew heavier every day. Liam's isolette was his entire universe, a clear plastic box that looked like something from a science fiction movie. It maintained the exact temperature and humidity his underdeveloped body needed to survive an artificial womb, because mine had failed him. I learned a new language there, medical jargon that became as familiar as English. Brady's when his heart rate would drop below safe levels. Desats when his oxygen saturation would plummet. Apnea spells when he would simply forget to breathe and alarms would shriek and nurses would rush over to stimulate him to remind his immature brain that breathing was necessary for life. A plus B equals C, the nurses would say with grim humor, their shorthand for when his heart rate and oxygen would crash simultaneously, a double crisis that happened multiple times a day in those early weeks. I became fluent in reading the monitors before the alarms could sound. My eyes were constantly trained on those screens on the numbers that meant everything. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, respiratory rate. I knew his baseline better than I knew my own. I could see a desat coming seconds before the alarm could watch his oxygen number start to drift down and feel my own heart rate spike in response. I developed a sixth sense for his distress, could tell from the subtle changes in his color or the tiny movements of his chest that something was wrong. I lived in that hospital in a way that made the word live feel like a cruel joke. I existed there. I survived there. I pumped breast milk every 3 hours in a small, depressing room with peeling paint and a broken recliner that tilted at an uncomfortable angle. The walls were decorated with motivational posters about the power of mother's milk, about bonding and nourishment, and they felt like vicious jokes when my baby couldn't even suck or swallow yet, when every drop of milk I produced went into a freezer to be fed through a tube threaded through his nose into his stomach. I held Liam skin to skin. Kangaroo care, they called it, this practice of holding a premature baby against your bare chest to regulate their temperature and heart rate. His entire body fit on my chest, his impossibly small head resting over my heart, and I could feel every fragile breath he took, could feel his heart beating against my skin like a hummingbird's wings, rapid and desperate and fighting so hard to keep going. I changed diapers the size of my thumb, these tiny preemie diapers that looked like doll clothes. I took his temperature through a probe taped to his paper-thin skin. I watched him breathe, except breathing isn't the right word for what he did in those early weeks. The ventilator breathed for him, a machine forcing air into lungs that weren't meant to encounter oxygen yet, and I watched the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest and knew it wasn't him. It was mechanics. It was technology keeping him alive. When they finally extubated him and moved him to CPAP, I cried with relief and terror, both because even though it meant progress, it also meant his survival was slightly less guaranteed, slightly more dependent on his own failing body. Julian was there as much as he could be, and I know it destroyed him to leave, but someone had to maintain the illusion of normal life. Someone had to keep working. Keep our insurance active, keep the bills paid, keep our apartment from falling into chaos. So, most days, most nights, it was just me. Me and the fluorescent lights that gave everything a sickly yellow tinge. Me and the constant symphony of alarms, a cacophony of beeps and chimes that meant different things, that sent nurses running or walking depending on the urgency. Me and the hand sanitizer that I used so many times a day, my hands cracked and bled. Me and the fear that lived in my throat, making it hard to swallow, hard to breathe, hard to exist. But I wasn't completely alone. There were the other NICU mothers, women I had never met before, would never have met in normal circumstances, but who became my sisters in a way my actual family never had been. Sarah, a lawyer whose identical twins were born at 25 weeks, even tinier than Liam, even more fragile. Maria, a teacher whose daughter had a congenital heart defect and was waiting for surgery that might kill her or save her, no way to know which. We found each other in that shared space of trauma, recognized the same haunted look in each other's eyes. We formed our own little tribe, separate from the world outside, separate from the families who didn't understand and couldn't help. We had our own private space where we could share our fears at 3 a.m. when we couldn't sleep, where we could celebrate the tiniest victories that meant everything in the NICU world, a gained ounce, a successful feeding and alarm-free hour. We understood each other's terror in a way no one else could because we were all living the same nightmare, just in slightly different versions. And through it all, my family was silent. I sent updates to the Crimson Family group chat almost daily. Liam gained an ounce today. Liam is off the ventilator and on CPAP. Liam opened his eyes and looked at me. The responses were perfunctory at best. My father, Edward, would send a thumbs up or a smiley face treating my son's life or death struggle like I had posted a nice sunset photo. My stepmother, Catherine, sent nothing. Marcus, my younger brother, was traveling for work, covering some investigative story overseas. And Aunt Estelle. She was too busy running the Crimson Family Foundation, too busy being the matriarch of our illustrious Boston family, too busy maintaining the image of old money philanthropy and perfect bloodlines. The Crimson family was everything I had tried to escape, but never quite could. We were old Boston money, the kind of family with a crest and a legacy and a foundation that threw elaborate charity galas. Aunt Estelle had taken over as the unofficial head after my mother died when I was 16. She was sharp-cold calculating. She ran the family like a corporation, and I had always been the problematic employee. My work writing for nonprofits that dealt with the messy realities of addiction and homelessness was considered distasteful, too close to the problems we were supposed to fix from a comfortable distance, not actually wade into. My sensitivity, my emotions, my inability to maintain the crimson facade of perfection, all of it made me an embarrassment, a liability. The first real punch to the gut came 3 weeks into Liam's NICU stay. I was scrolling through social media during one of my pumping sessions, a mindless activity to keep my brain from spiraling into worst-case scenarios when I saw it. A photo of my father Edward, my stepmother Catherine, and Aunt Estelle at a polo match, all dressed in pristine white, smiling broadly. The caption read, "A perfect family day." I stared at that photo for a long time, my breast pump humming mechanically in the background. A perfect family day. While my son fought for every breath 3 floors below, while I hadn't left the hospital in days, while I was pumping milk in a depressing room at odd hours, they were having a perfect family day. And I wasn't even in the picture. Neither was Liam. We had been erased from their perfect family portrait. That was when I stopped checking the family group chat. I stopped sending updates. I stopped hoping for acknowledgement or support. I poured everything I had into Liam and into the small community of NICU mothers who actually understood. Dr. Anya Sharma, Liam's neonatologist, became another source of strength. She was brilliant, compassionate, and she saw me. She saw a mother fighting alone, and while she couldn't comment on my family situation, her kindness spoke volumes. 5 weeks into our NICU journey, I got the text from Marcus that would change everything. At first, I was confused. Aunt Evelyn, my father's sister who had been pushed to the margins of the family by Aunt Estelle years ago, was in the hospital with a severe stroke. And they were all there. The entire family had mobilized for her. I felt a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe just curiosity about why Marcus was so frantic to reach me. Then Marcus called, his voice tight with confusion and hurt. "Eleanor, where are you? Why aren't you at Mass General? Dad is really upset that you're not here for Aunt Evelyn. She's in critical condition." The words came out of me in a flood, then all the pain and loneliness and fear of the past 5 weeks. I told him about Liam, about the NICU, about the isolette and the monitors and the terrifying nights, about how I had sent message after message and received nothing, about how our family had attended polo matches and galas while my son fought for his life. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold. "But Eleanor, Aunt Estelle said she arranged meals for you, visited you, watched Liam so you could rest. She said you were suffering from severe postpartum depression and didn't want to see anyone. She said the hospital doctors advised against any visits because of your fragile mental state." The world tilted. My ears rang. I felt like I had been physically struck. "She what?" Marcus repeated it, his voice now uncertain. "Aunt Estelle told us you were unstable. She said she was in contact with your doctors. She said visits would be harmful to you. She mentioned your previous miscarriages as evidence of your emotional fragility. Eleanor, we thought we were respecting your wishes. We thought we were protecting you." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The rage that had been simmering for 5 weeks ignited into an inferno. She had lied. Aunt Estelle had systematically lied to my entire family, painting me as mentally unstable, as a danger to myself or my child, all to keep them away. But why? Why would she do that? "I need you to go see Liam," I told Marcus, my voice shaking. "I need you to see him, to see what I've been living, and then I need you to find out the truth." Marcus, to his credit, went immediately. He drove straight from Mass General to the NICU where Liam was. He scrubbed in, following all the protocols, and sat beside Liam's isolette. He was 5 weeks old, then still so small, still connected to monitors and feeding tubes, but stronger. Marcus held his tiny nephew's hand with one finger and wept. He texted me a photo, and I could see the devastation and rage on his face. Later, he told me that sitting there with Liam, seeing how small and vulnerable he was feeling, the weight of 5 weeks of absence broke something in him. But Marcus was an investigative journalist. He knew how to find the truth. He went to our father's house that same evening and demanded answers. And Edward Vance, my father, a man who had always put the family image above everything, finally crumbled under his son's interrogation. Aunt Estelle had told them I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. She claimed she had spoken to hospital staff who were deeply concerned about my mental state. She said that I was having delusional episodes, that I was fixated on the baby to an unhealthy degree, that doctors recommended a complete isolation period to stabilize me. She had used my previous miscarriages as proof of my instability, suggesting I had a history of mental health issues around pregnancy. She had been so convincing, so authoritative, so seemingly concerned that no one questioned her. Not my father, not Catherine, not anyone. Marcus confronted her that night. He called her directly and asked point blank if she had ever spoken to any of my doctors. There was a pause. Then Aunt Estelle said coldly, "I was protecting this family. Eleanor has always been dramatic, always emotional. This situation required management. Someone had to keep things under control." The truth was even worse than I imagined. Aunt Estelle hadn't just lied. She had orchestrated a complete information blockade. She was what psychologists call a narcissistic gatekeeper, someone who controls access to information and resources to maintain their own power. I had always been a threat to her, the sensitive one who wouldn't play by the crimson rules, who wrote about poverty and addiction instead of attending garden parties. With Liam's premature birth, she saw an opportunity. She could isolate me, control the narrative, and continue to run the family unchallenged. My pain was inconvenient. My son's struggle didn't fit the perfect image, so she erased us. And then while I was alone in that hospital, she had attended the Children's Hospital Fund Gala. The ultimate irony, and basked in praise for the Crimson family's generosity. She had turned my nightmare into her PR opportunity. When Marcus told me everything, I felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. I was done. I was done being the inconvenient daughter, the embarrassment, the one whose pain was too messy for the Crimson image. I was done accepting crumbs of acknowledgement and calling it family. I asked Marcus to arrange a video call with everyone. Edward, Catherine, and especially Estelle. It was time for the truth. The call happened that same evening. I was in the small family room outside the NICU, my laptop open on the table. Julian sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder, silent support. Marcus was on the call too, his face grim. When Edward and Catherine appeared on screen, they looked haggard, ashamed. Before my father could launch into an apology, before he could try to explain or justify, I held up my hand. "No. You don't get to speak yet. Watch." I turned the laptop toward the NICU window. The camera focused on Liam in his isolette, tiny and vulnerable, covered in wires and monitors. "This is your grandson," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Liam, 5 weeks old, 2 pounds 1 ounce, and for 5 weeks he has been fighting for his life. Alone, because you believed a lie." I turned the camera back to myself. "And you. Dad, you believed that lie because it was easier than picking up the phone and calling me yourself. It was easier than actually showing up. It was easier than dealing with something messy and uncomfortable that didn't fit the perfect Crimson image." Then Aunt Estelle appeared on screen, her arms crossed, her expression icy. She looked like a CEO in a hostile negotiation, completely unmoved. "Eleanor," she cut in sharply, "you're becoming hysterical. This is exactly the kind of dramatic behavior we wanted to avoid. You're unstable. We respected the doctor's wishes." "What doctor's wishes?" I shot back, my voice like steel. "Or your wishes, Estelle. You never spoke to any doctor. You never came here. You never made a single phone call to me. I was protecting this family, protecting your father from your emotional breakdowns. Someone had to manage the situation." Manage. I leaned toward the camera, my eyes locked on hers. "Is that what you were doing at the Children's Hospital Fund Gala, managing? Tell me, Estelle, how did it feel, standing on that stage, accepting applause for your generosity? How did it feel knowing my son was on a ventilator just miles away? You didn't just lie. You performed. You turned my son's crisis into a prop for your reputation. You weren't protecting this family. You were protecting your image." For the first time, I saw something flicker in Aunt Estelle's eyes. Not remorse, not shame, but the realization that she had been caught, that her carefully constructed narrative had collapsed. My father turned slowly to look at Estelle, and I saw understanding dawn on his face. The truth was undeniable now. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I ended the call, leaving them in silence. The next morning, Edward and Catherine showed up at the NICU. They looked destroyed, hollowed out by shame and guilt. They didn't try to make excuses. They just stood there asking quietly if they could see Liam. I let them. I watched as my father approached the isolette as he saw his grandson for the first time, as tears streamed down his face. He wasn't the patriarch of the Crimson family in that moment. He was just a grandfather filled with regret. Your relationship with us, I told them both, will be built on truth from now on. Not image, not performance. Truth, or it won't be built at all. They nodded, unable to speak. 10 weeks after his birth, Liam came home. He was healthy, thriving, a miracle. The NICU had been our crucible, and we had emerged forever changed. 1 week after we brought Liam home, Aunt Estelle came to our apartment. She didn't call ahead. She simply showed up carrying herself with her usual imperious authority. She offered a substantial contribution to Liam's trust fund from the Crimson Family Foundation. It was an attempt to buy back control, to reassert her power through money, to show that she was still the one who held the strings. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had caused so much pain, who had stolen 5 weeks of family support from me when I needed it most, who had used my son's suffering for her own gain. Then I said simply, "We don't need your charitable contributions, Estelle." Her face hardened. "I'm your aunt. I'm family." I picked up my phone and met her eyes. "No, Estelle. You're a relative. My family is in this house. You're not welcome here." I hung up. She called back multiple times. I never answered. 1 year later, we threw Liam's first birthday party in our small, warm apartment. It was crowded with people who had actually earned the right to be there. Marcus was there, having become Liam's fiercest protector and my closest ally. Aunt Evelyn was there, recovered from her stroke and finally free from Estelle's shadow, smiling and laughing. Sarah and Maria from the NICU came with their children, these women who had held my hand through the darkest time. Dr. Anya Sharma stopped by with a gift, still the compassionate presence she had been throughout our ordeal. And yes, Edward and Catherine were there too. They had spent the year rebuilding, showing up, being present without trying to control or perform. Edward sat on the floor, helping Liam open presents, no longer concerned with image or prestige. Just a grandfather trying to make amends through consistent, quiet love. As I watched Liam smash his birthday cake, his face covered in frosting, surrounded by people who truly loved him, I felt a peace I had never known in the Crimson family. Blood doesn't make you family. Love does. Respect does. Showing up does. Leaving a toxic relationship isn't failure. It's not giving up. It's an act of courage, of self-preservation, of choosing peace over pain. It's the moment you finally decide that you and your family deserve better. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect yourself and those you love? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they deserve better. Your story matters, your peace matters, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away.